Welcome everyone to the August Dutch webinar. I'm Noah Reed, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Precision Analytical, creators of the Dutch test. Today, we are bringing you our very special guest, Dr. Andrew Rostenberg, to explain estrogen detox and the MTHFR gene. He'll share the latest and data insights on the connection between genes, gut biome, nutrition, and hormone metabolism. If you're new to us today and not already familiar with the Dutch test, Dutch stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones. It is a group of validated tests that provide the most complete evaluation of sex and adrenal hormones, including their metabolites. This simple and convenient at-home collection for patients and support on every comprehensive report from a team of hormone experts puts you in the driver's seat to helping your patients solve their most complex hormone issues. Registering as a Dutch provider is really easy. If you sign up today, you'll receive 50% off up to your first 5 kits to help get you started, plus free clinical consults, video tutorials, patient referrals, and expert hormone education. To sign up, just click the link that we've posted in the chat and complete the Become a Provider form on our website. For even more hormone education, check out the entire first season of the Dutch podcast on your favorite streaming app. We just wrapped up season 1 with experts like Tara Scott, Deb Matthew, Jeff Bland, and many more. So visit dutchtest.com/podcast to subscribe and join the list to get updates on season 2, which we're starting production on really soon. Before we get started, please note that we've posted today's slides in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel below, and we will send you the recording and slides to everyone who signed up tomorrow. If you have questions along the way, please add them to the question section of the control panel. Dr. Rostenberg will answer as many as he can before the hour is up. Lastly, keep in mind that Dr. Rostenberg is a doctor, but he's not your doctor. The contents of this webinar are for educational and informational purposes only. The information is not to be interpreted as or mistaken for clinical advice. Please consult a medical professional or healthcare provider for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Patients can find a Dutch provider on our website by clicking Find a Provider at the top of the page. And now let me introduce today's speaker. Dr. Andrew Rostenberg is a chiropractor, kinesiologist, methylation researcher, author, and director of Red Mountain Natural Clinic in Boise, Idaho. Personally, I can say that he's also a great road trip companion because we spent a few days together at a conference in 2019 where he gave me his book, Your Genius Body, which I highly recommend reading. In addition to running his practice, Dr. Rostenberg has developed cutting-edge protocols using methylation pathways designed to optimize biochemistry, detoxification, digestion, brain function, and more. He is the founder of Beyond MTHFR, a leading voice in the emerging field of functional medicine and genetics, raising awareness on how genetic variation impacts our health. He is the author of Your Genius Body, a book designed to help connect the dots between genetics, gut health, and optimized brain function. From his Beyond MTHFR YouTube channel and website, he has reached patients from all over the world who would optimize their genes and change their lives. We're so excited to have Dr. Rostenberg with us today. Welcome to the webinar, and we're ready when you are.
All right, Noah, thanks for that fantastic introduction. And to everybody out there listening, hey, I'm excited to be with you. We're all learning every day of our practice life here. And I'm a student too, even though I get to be the one leading you through this. So if I click around and look like I don't know what I'm doing on GoToMeeting, that's just a mirage. Because no, I'm kidding. I haven't used GoToMeeting in a little while. So if my video jumps off, I'll bring it back on. We're having a little technical fun stuff going on, but the meat, the nutrition, the clinical pearls that you've come to expect from today, those won't be inhibited in any way. That's the good news. So this talk is really geared towards explaining the field, the issue regarding MTHFR and how that would impact estrogen levels and how that could impact health in your patient population. But of course, a long discourse just on methylation and the pathways involved is pretty boring for the average person. And even for the average clinician, you got to be a special kind of nerd, kind of like maybe I'm a special kind of nerd too, but you really have to be a special kind of nerd to want to just chase everything down. So what I've done and what I try to do in my presentation today is give you big picture ideas with some hard hitting nuggets along the way that can help you fill in the gaps in your understanding, because estrogen is absolutely a critical component in practice of any kind of functional medicine practitioner. And it's not just females that are under our consideration. We're also looking at how estrogen affects males as well. And just to get started, kind of look at the society at large. I always like to look at 30,000 feet at problems before I go and take a walk through the forest, so to speak. We have a situation in our culture due to environmental factors and some epigenetic side effects of that are creating just like the perfect storm for cancer. And this study came out a few years ago, but what really caught my attention was at this point in time, anybody born after the year 1960, they have a 50% chance of having cancer in their lifetime. And that's just a shocking statement, a shocking data point. I have a hard time getting over that, because around the turn of last century, in the 1900s, somewhere around 3% of the population died from cancer. And what has changed in the ensuing 120 years? And our love affair with chemistry, our bastardization of the food supply, and we've divorced ourselves, let's say, from some of our ancestral concepts that were really healthy and good that we should have retained. So some of that we have to go and relearn, but this is the playing field. This is everybody on this call. Not everybody was born after 1960, but what I mean is people on this call, this is going to affect you. This is going to affect your patient population in a large way. So we have to understand that cancer is on the rise, especially for women. And despite all of the pink ribbons that are promoted, and all the marathons and half marathons and all the fundraising, I kind of think that, where does all this fundraising money go? Are they just going to find another drug to try to treat cancer? Wouldn't it be so nice if we put all these millions of dollars, tens and maybe hundreds of millions that's raised into making better food and working on prevention? But that's not the nature of this presentation. What you see in front of you, though, is a selection of epidemiology from different parts of the world. And our awareness of the breast cancer issue is higher than it's ever been. And our rates of breast cancer and death from breast cancer continue to go up. So this is frustrating to me as a practitioner, because we should be seeing the trend go in the other direction. And so we're still not winning this quote unquote war on cancer, and estrogen driving the breast cancer problem is something we need to focus on in practice. We have to understand estrogen, understand its nature, its positives, its negatives. And once we have that lens and focus, then we can start to really do a better job taking care of our patients. So just one of those kind of, again, powerful data points. All the trends across these different cultures around the world are on the increase, despite all the effort we're putting in. So not a good return on investment so far. Now, even, birth control has changed a lot over the last 50 years since it's been introduced, 60 years. Even the modern birth control is still causing cancer. A woman's lifetime risk of cancer is related to her lifetime risk or lifetime exposure of estrogen. So the more molecules of estrogen a woman particularly is exposed to during her lifetime, the higher the odds that those tissues that respond to estrogen are going to become dysfunctional and potentially mutagenic and lead to cancer growth. So we have this situation where women have been poisoned by estrogen, right? There was a study, I don't even have the slide on it for today. It was another really good epidemiological study. And what they did was, it was in the British Medical Journal, and they looked at rates of prostate cancer around the world. And they were able to correlate that in large metropolitan areas like in South Africa, in Europe, Asia, United States, and elsewhere, where there were more women on birth control, there were higher rates of prostate cancer. We do clean our municipal water supply of like disease vectors, but we don't clean our municipal water supplies of pharmaceuticals. So that's the vector. Women take birth control, they go to the bathroom, the estrogen, ethinyl estradiol gets in the municipal water supply, and then go to the pub, they go watch a game at the pub, they drink their beer, and they're taking a little dose of birth control with their beer, unfortunately, and over time that excess estrogen builds up in male bodies and drives prostate cancer. So again, it's not just a female-centric problem, but we will bias our discussion today more towards the female part of practice. And this study in front of you simply says that with up to 10 years of use of birth control, your relative risk in a female of cancer is 38%. And we all know women in our practice, unfortunately, they may have been on birth control for 15, 20, even 25 years. There are women out there that have done that. And this is not a discussion of, fertility rights or reproduction. It's just an honest look at the biochemistry. What does this estrogen do to the human body, the response elements inside women's bodies? So the idea with estrogen is, a woman needs some. She doesn't need a deficiency. That's not healthy. We'll talk about that. And she doesn't need this excess. And we've all heard of the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the carpet gets 80% of the wear, and so on. This certainly does apply to practice. If your practice is anything like mine, 80% or more of your females are showing up with signs of excess estrogen. There are deficiency cases out there, but again, the woman burdened by high levels of estrogen is just simply the more common situation. I like this study because it's very clear, and I like when PhDs are clear. I'll admit I've read a lot of research, and when you read the mental landscape of a PhD brain doing high-level biochemistry, it's not like a smoothly reading poem or a nice action novel that you're reading. It can be kind of hard to get through, but sometimes they have these really clear statements. So I like this first point, and it says simply that in oral contraceptive users, plasma levels of practically all coagulation factors increase. So most of us know that, but again, the idea is that estrogen makes the blood viscosity increase. This is going to be a problem for individuals with MTHFR, and some of you in practice have patients like this. If you're newer in practice, I'm sure at some point, if you're in practice long enough, you'll meet a patient like this. A young woman who was recommended birth control maybe in her late teens or early 20s, and unfortunately for this person had a stroke. And within 30 days or a short period of time, just a couple months of taking the birth control, there are, again, unfortunately, situations in young women, teenagers even, who develop severe pulmonary embolisms from some of the modern birth controls as well, because that's one of the natures of estrogen. It's important to know what estrogen does, right? So if we increase estrogen to a high physiologic level above even what is physiologically normal, using a medication like this, we need to know with pretty good certainty where some of those risk factors are going to be for this individual. So somebody who has MTHFR issues, which slows down the clearance of estrogen through phase 2 detox and through gallbladder function, they would be susceptible to potentially having coagulation problems, which could lead to strokes. If you look at other genes like factor 7 or factor 5 laden, you can start to see that this is a risky kind of medication for people, women who already have a problem with coagulation issues. So, and a lot of times in pregnancy, as another clinical pearl, the general idea with pregnancy is the baby needs oxygenation and it needs nutrition, right? It needs fuel, it needs oxygen, and it needs general, vitamins and cofactors. The placenta, the placental barrier with the mother's body is as small a vasculature as we can operate. Like, it's the smallest kind of arterial blood supply that the body makes, very, very microscopic, tiny blood vessels. And so that's, we take these big vessels in the mom's body, we step down, step down, step down, and allows that nutrition, glucose, vitamins and minerals across the vascular bed and get into the baby's body, and the baby can grow and be happy. Unfortunately, in some women, especially women, as you'll see with MTHFR and some of these other coagulation issues, when their estrogen levels are abnormally high, or their body can't process or handle estrogen correctly, the blood becomes more viscous. So if you have a condition of higher viscosity in the blood, and you have a system that pushes blood through the tiniest, smallest blood vessels that human bodies make, you have a recipe for creating crisis in pregnancy. Things like preeclampsia, eclampsia, and other, even unfortunately, loss of pregnancy, spontaneous abortion. It is a heartbreaking and very difficult thing to see that happen. But when we understand estrogen, and we know that it creates a procoagulant state, we can intervene with nutrition and the right kind of, therapeutic levels of cofactors and vitamins that are going to help process estrogen. Then you lower viscosity, and you don't create that crisis. Because when a woman's body, when the infant is stressed, it will communicate with the woman's body and say, mom, I'm not getting enough oxygen, I'm not getting enough glucose, I'm not growing as fast as I would like to, help me. And the natural response by the woman's body is to increase blood pressure and increase pushing through that really small vascular bed. So if we can use methylation and understanding of hormones to make pregnancy healthier for women. And that's one of the things in my practice that I enjoy doing, and certainly having this understanding of how estrogen creates coagulability helps me do that. So this is just one of those studies that points out if you increase estrogen in women's bodies, you're increasing the risk of clotting disorders and potentially stroke. And really, it's a simple mechanism, a very, to me, simple and sort of dependable mechanism. You take any woman who's estrogen dominant will be prone to having a higher viscosity of her blood. It's just the nature of the beast. There's occasionally in the news a famous person, I believe it was, and again, forgive me if I don't get the name right, it was either Serena or Venus Williams, tennis superstar. A few years ago, maybe even more, maybe 10 years ago, she had split surgery, got on an airplane, and developed a deep vein thrombosis. Now, you wouldn't expect somebody who is a world-class athlete at the top of their game to suffer some kind of side effect from a minor surgery, but surgery creates an inflammatory state. You have a procoagulant state promoted in that area, but due to that higher estrogenicity in females in today's world with all these estrogen toxins, that blood viscosity is already kind of dangerously high. When you add just a little bit of a stressor, a little bit of an inflammatory provocation, something like that can happen. Luckily, it's minor, caught it in the leg, but these deep vein thrombosis episodes can be life-threatening. If they get into your lung or your brain, you have a life-threatening problem. So that's part of the story of estrogen in our world. And again, looking at some other research, it's hard to perfuse inside of the human body the microvasculature under normal resting conditions. There's lots of physiologic changes. There's hormones like renin, angiotensin. There's stress factors. There's inflammatory factors. People don't drink enough water, for example. They're busy drinking coffee and energy drinks all throughout the day. I mean, we've all been guilty of not hydrating enough. So there's lots of challenges to getting blood to flow through the microvasculature in our brain, right? In our intestinal tract, in our internal organs, get that good perfusion, deliver oxygen where it's needed. So when we have women, especially with this high estrogen situation where they're carrying a high load of estrogen through their body, they have that coagulated blood. Again, you may see some symptoms in practice that are consistent with lack of blood flow to the brain. So that could be, in this case, this is looking at vertigo and some of those vestibular issues that you see in practice with people being dizzy and having orthostatic issues. Could be low blood pressure from an adrenal problem that you might see on a Dutch test, but also could be high estrogen levels and coagulated blood. Now, don't get me wrong, I like to talk about bad news first because it gets your attention. Your reptilian brain, your limbic system just grabs on to all the bad news. So there's a lot of bad news in this seminar, but it's part of how we educate ourselves, okay? So we need to know what the risks are so we have that motivation, that clarity of why we're gonna intervene. And I guess this goes under the category of more bad news too. They did this study way back in like 2004, but it's still a really good data point. They looked at cord blood from a handful of babies in the United States in 2004, and there was over 200 industrial, pollutants and chemicals. Frustrating because, like 180 of them, some odd, were like known carcinogens, and another 217 are toxic to the brain and the nervous system. And this is the background in which we live. And even us, even the educated, naturally minded physicians and practitioners out there, we make an effort to avoid these chemicals, but it's really not possible. I'm sitting on a desk that has a wood covering that would, probably be a $5,000 piece of furniture. I have to admit, I didn't pay $5,000 for the table, so it's probably, glued together with formaldehyde and something else that off gases similar chemicals. And it's, you can go crazy if you examine everything in your life that way. It's better if we just support the body's natural physiology and give ourselves enough vitamins, cofactors, and nutrients so our body can the intelligence inside the body is so profound, it will correct these problems, and we will never know them to be there, because with enough throughput, enough vitamin, cofactor activity, you can detox all of this stuff and live a long, healthy life. That's our goal for our patients. So just a few more data points kind of on the big picture with estrogen. So we kind of talked about the coagulated blood. We talked about the higher rates of breast cancer, the ubiquity of these poisoning, xenoestrogens in our environment, and even in the cord blood of babies. And now we have this issue where puberty is becoming a problem earlier and earlier for women. And if it was a species of frogs, we would be talking about it and we would be concerned. If it was a species of birds, we'd be talking about it, we'd be concerned. And it's happened to those species, and now it's happening to us. And you can just see with clarity on this chart here that, we have this sort of steady state. In the 80s, it was clear that the mean onset of puberty, breast development, was around 11 years old. But something happened in the late 1990s and 2000s that really shifted the needle. And there's all these higher rates in the literature, higher encounters in healthcare of young girls dealing with precocious puberty. And the body isn't designed to go through puberty at 8 years old, because if a girl goes through puberty at 8 years old, that's extra years that her cells, her breast tissue, the germ cells in her reproductive organ are exposed to mitogenic stimulatory hormones. And over time, that can dramatically put her in a risk category later in life that could, create breast cancer or ovarian cancer or, tumors in the uterine lining, that kind of thing. So I'm a parent. I have a young daughter, 5-year-old, and frankly, I want her to be as healthy as possible, as I know everybody listening does as well. So we have some work to do on helping these children detox as part of their healthy daily habit. And again, the age, even the age of when the cycle begins, is actually decreasing also. So you can look, in 1915, the average was somewhere in the age 15. And then by 1995, the average was, in 12 and a half. And this is kind of startling. It's saying that, basically they're getting about half a year, or we're going about 6 months earlier for girls beginning their menstrual cycle every decade. I mean, if this trend continues, just use your imagination and project this out. Where will we be in 10 years and 20 years? I hope the trend goes the other way. And I think the people on this call and this kind of, the type of doctors who are doing this testing have a role to play in making a better world for the women in our life. Okay, we can do this. So that's kind of the heavy start, the bad news. Now we kind of look at what estrogen does. And then with hormones, the endocrine system is fascinating. Learned through practice and from other teachers that, your hormones are stronger than your diet. We all have patients in our practice who they might literally eat 900 calories and still gain weight. It scratches your head. You're like, how's that possible? Well, there's a hormone response. There's an endocrine response when you starve yourself, the stress related with starvation, the energy economy related to that. And so we know that hormones are extremely powerful, more powerful than our diet and probably everything else in the body. I'm reading an excellent book right now. It's called The Theory of Endobiogeny. And I just found it a couple weeks ago, and on a whim, I ordered the book. and it's just a fascinating read. And basically it's all about the terrain. So it's basically a kind of a subset of functional medicine just focused on the terrain. And they're very adamant that the endocrine system is the regulator of the human terrain. I like the theory, I like the evidence, so I'll keep going down that rabbit hole and see what we find. But estrogen has a genomic action and it has a non-genomic, just like all hormones. They'll either do something to the DNA, you get a protein built, or there's other signaling pathways in the cell. So there's really lots of avenues for this hormone to interact with our biology. One of the reasons why estrogen, is helpful in moderate amounts is, it increases vasodilation, there's more blood flow to tissues when it's in the healthy range. And this is why women in general, before they hit menopause, women are protected. Women up till menopause, without question, have a lower risk of the 15 leading causes of death that we know of. So men simply are going to die at a higher rate than women for all top 15 leading causes up until menopause. And maybe it's fate or, cruel twist of fate. Once women hit menopause, and I'll show you the data on this, it flips again. And now men are protected and women have higher risk. So again, there's so many opportunities here to help women live a longer, healthier life. We need to understand why that's happening, and that's what I'm going to share with you here in a few minutes. So post-menopause, women lose this protection, but before menopause, with healthy estrogen levels, there's a lot of benefits to having that middle of the bell curve, healthy range of estrogen. Mentioned this just a minute ago. There's really two pathways that estrogen interacts with the human body. Same would be true for the other steroids and hormones. We have a receptor in the nucleus here that's going to lead to, protein production and some genomic changes. And then we have a non-genomic pathway that just leads to other beneficial effects, other effects of the hormones. And the endocrine system is a fascinating part of our body. It is stronger than our diet, resistant weight loss, insomnia cases of stress and anxiety, depression. There's a massive hormone relationship to all of these conditions that we see in practice. So I've just found a lot of value over the years looking at hormones, and that's why we're talking about it today. So this is something I want you to keep in mind. This is one of my key concepts here. When we say estrogen dominant, the knee-jerk reaction is to think, I'm going to do a test. I'm gonna do a Dutch test. I could do a blood test. I could do a test that's out there in the marketplace, and I expect the test to come back and something to be out of range. So my brain knows for certain there's estrogen dominance. And I have to say that the answer is going to be a little more nuanced than that. Testing has a lot of value, but you can't measure every estrogenic compound that we know of. At least you couldn't in regular practice. Probably in a research practice or some PhD level program, we could start to analyze those hundreds, if not thousands, of molecules and give someone an estrogen score. That'd be a cool test. I wonder how much it would cost. But when we talk about excessive estrogen, we're not just including the estrone, estradiol, and estriol. We need to think bigger than that. We need to think beyond the hormones and really think about the total environmental epigenetic load that we were under in preconception, post-conception, in utero, and throughout the years of our life. It's a lot of estrogen, okay? So we don't want to get pigeonholed and narrow in our focus and just looking at E1, E2, and E3, because we're about to, here's why, okay? So mold. Mold is a problem in functional medicine practices because you're going to see a lot of patients who are ill and sick with mold. We happen to live in an indoor environment that if you dipped it in water for a few minutes, maybe submerge the material that your room is in right now for half an hour and then set it out to dry, leave it in your house. Almost everything in your room is going to mold. It's amazing. There's mold spores everywhere. So mold, as you start to study mold like I have and many of you have, it'll blow your hair back how ubiquitous and common mold is. For today's discussion, what I think is really kind of important to know is there are mycotoxins and there are mycoestrogens. So not only do mycotoxins, we think of ochratoxin A or aflatoxin, that kind of thing. We know they are health negative and they're toxic. They just disturb our mitochondrial function, create inflammation. They can make people very chronically sick. But we also have evidence that mycoestrogens also are in our environment. In this particular study, they're looking at a mycoestrogen that's found in the food supply. It has to do with dairy products. But they're literally telling us, word for word, that this chemical, alpha ZA, the mycoestrogen, is a full ER alpha agonist. So it is just as effective as a molecule of estradiol at hitting those receptors in the nucleus and in the cell and making things change. You don't want to have a lot of this mycoestrogen in your body because you're going to have those cells that respond to estrogen getting pounded on by this estrogen signal that maybe you're not even aware of, because are you testing for mycoestrogens at this time, right? Are we looking at mold or fungal load as a possibility for the vector for this person, this woman perhaps, who's dealing with symptoms of high estrogen? Her test could come back normal, looking just at estradiol and the regular human estrogens, but she could be off the chart high in mycoestrogens, and that's driving her symptomology. So it's just something I want you all to be aware of. There are more estrogens out there than just the 3 that we measure from human beings. Okay, so what happens when a woman who's estrogen dominant and can't detox estrogen because of MTHFR and poor gallbladder function? Maybe she has developed some yeast overgrowth from using antibiotics for a few sinus infections, and when she was younger, rather than work with somebody who took her off of her allergic foods, she had a lot of runny noses, sinus drainage, and she got a lot of ear infections. So she was on maybe a dozen antibiotics between her first 4 or 5 years of life, and then several more as a teenager and young adult. So at that point, she's changed her biome, and perhaps she's developed an overgrowth of Candida, a very common problem. Well, that Candida is going to spread, and it often gets into the vaginal biome, the vaginal tissue. And interestingly, there's symbiosis between estrogen and Candida. So one pearl for you today is that women who are very estrogen dominant and highly loaded with estrogen are going to be more susceptible to having vaginal yeast issues, because, as this study points out, which I think is just a fascinating concept, that you will see Candida albicans grow 8.6 times faster in the presence of estradiol than if there is no estrogen in the environment. So we never want to get just like myopically focused on one thing. Functional medicine is really all about, you go into a data point, you jump back up, you look at the big picture, and you build a model that makes sense, meaning the body doesn't make mistakes. That's why the book that I wrote is called Your Genius Body. It's kind of a play on words, but I firmly believe that. I see it in practice. I experience it every day in practice and in my life. Bodies don't make mistakes. So there's always a reason why things happen. So again, a woman who has recurrent yeast infections needs to be screened and looked at from the point of view of estrogen dominance, because estrogen feeds yeast. It's amazing how the microorganisms in our gut and on our skin and everything respond to our endocrine system. It's just, I'm sure there's a lot more we could dive into on this. And then there's heavy metals. So, kids get Matchbox cars, little babies, and they start chewing on them. They put the toys in their mouth, all those heavy metal leads and crazy compounds used to paint the toys. They get a little older and they're given, standard candy from big food conglomerates, and those food dyes, the artificial coloring that we have in our food, is basically heavy metals. If you look at the ingredients, it's like titanium, aluminum, other heavy metals. So we're all exposed to heavy metals in the pollution in the air, in our food. Again, it's just the nature of the time that we're living. But what, again, is important to keep in mind, heavy metals don't just make us sick and create, damage our tissues through inflammation. They are actually, most of them, metalloestrogens. So here again, another foreign xeno compound to the human body. We're ubiquitously exposed to it. And what do we see? We see that it actually acts like estrogen in the human body. This is why estrogen dominance, the 80-20 rule is in play, and it may be like the 95-5 rule in your practice. 95% of the time, women are going to show up with just too much estrogen, unable to excrete it and get it out of their body. And that's what we're going to be going over here in the last part of the call. So moving on, we look at estrogen as this bell curve. I love to model things on a bell curve. That's how my teacher taught me, and I really appreciate being able to model things, because I'll admit functional medicine is confusing and it's complicated. So we need to make things as simple as we can without making them overly simple so that it's no longer accurate. We want to get a high level of accuracy and a high level of simplicity, and that makes practice more fun. So these are some of the symptoms of low estrogen from hormone deficiency. Again, stroke, dementia, depression, cardiovascular disease, hot flashes. Women will generally suffer cardiovascular disease at a high rate after menopause because of a hormone deficiency. On the other side of the coin, when hormones in excess, ironically, because of that hypercoagulability, women can also suffer strokes and cardiovascular disease, although it's going to be from a little different mechanism if the estrogen is too high. But what we're going to focus on for today's talk is about this COMT-MAO pathway regarding neurotransmitters, and we're going to look at gallbladder function in the next few slides here. So postmenopausal women have a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. That's what I was saying earlier. It's a cruel twist of fate. In the beginning of your life and in the middle of your life, when you're making estrogen, a woman makes an enormous amount of choline. Choline is a phenomenal methyl donor. Besides folate, choline is the #2 most used methyl donor in the human body. And in fact, when you don't have enough folate coming in, your body will cannibalize and eat the choline out of your white matter, and it will mine it out of your tissues to provide a way to activate and run the methylation cycle. And estrogen helps women activate a gene called PEMT, and estrogen allows massive quantities of choline to be made, and it's just a brilliant, elegantly designed system. But as women go through menopause and they have poor adrenal health and their hormones go from being overly stuck too high and they drop too low now they actually lose that supportive benefit. They lose the vasodilation from estrogen. Their arteries become stiffer, and there's a lot of downstream effects from having a deficiency. Like I said in the beginning, we don't want to have a deficiency. So this is the data, right? So lower levels of endogenous estrogens are driving the risk factor in postmenopausal women. And it's going to affect stroke risk. So if a woman has early menopause compared to a woman who has normal menopause, and I should define what early menopause is in our concept. So the average woman, somewhere between the ages of 51 to 55, makes the transition into menopause. When that happens a decade or 15 years earlier, something has gone on in the endocrine system for a really long time to, basically age them from an endocrine point of view. It's exhausted their system through chronic adrenal stress and, HPA activation and so on. But what the research is showing is that if a woman has early onset menopause, 45 years or younger, they have a relative risk of about 50% higher congestive heart disease, or about a 23% increased risk of overall stroke. And we're going from this two ends of the spectrum of high estrogen, hypercoagulability, stroke, toxicity, to slamming the needle to the other side where there's deficiency. And health is not found at the extremes of this curve. It's not found at the extreme of blood pressure. It's not found at the extreme of dopamine or serotonin. We want to get into Goldilocks zone, and functional medicine, the right testing and protocols can help us get there. So methylation comes into the discussion here because methylation has a massive impact on gallbladder function, and the gallbladder is the bottleneck for estrogen detoxification. It's just that simple. I would say the pearl to take away is that the gallbladder is the most estrogen and methylation sensitive organ in the body, and the fact that so many gallbladders are destroyed and break down and are removed in our culture is an indication of how poor this understanding is and how poorly we support women to manage their estrogen in the right way. So as far as the cycle goes, this is actually the simplistic version of the methylation cycle. This is also called the one carbon cycle. basically we have folate from supplements and from our diet that grabs homocysteine and pushes it through this circle of recreating SAMe, and SAMe then donates the methylation part of that into about 150 different chemical reactions. Sometimes we can get that SAMe from dietary protein in the form of the methionine molecule, but the reason we need to make sure we have enough B12 and folate in our diet, in our system, to help manage hormones is simply that your body will need these vitamins to phase 2 detoxify estrogen. So the higher your estrogen load, if you have triple or 10 times the level of estrogen, your body will consume, use, and eliminate from your body 10 times the number of molecules of B12, 10 times the number of the molecule of B9 in order to manage that estrogen. So as our estrogen load goes up, our throughput and our need for those vitamins is going to go way up to match that, okay? Sulfation is also an important part of detoxification, but really methylation, MTHFR sets the stage for the susceptibility. A couple quick data points. It's interesting that, you know, when you look at the data here, in the Hispanic community and Southern Italy have the highest rates of MTHFR genetics in the world, okay? To my knowledge, as far as I can see in the epidemiology, there isn't a higher rate of stroke or spina bifida or pregnancy loss or cancer or anything else in that population, because the ancestral diet of people in the Mexican country and people in Italy is rich in phytonutrients and methyl donors. And so your diet overcomes your genetic problem when you're consuming enough of these methyl donors. It doesn't actually lead to disease expression. Another data point basically saying the same thing. Interesting here that 51% of Italians have at least one copy of MTHFR. So again, the Italian country is one of the highest IQs. Look at their art, look at their literature, look at what they've accomplished with all these MTHFR genes. That's not the thing to lose sleep over, but again, it's a side effect of the Italian traditional cuisine is rich in the vitamins that we now take in supplements because our cuisine is so crappy. I don't want to bore you with this stuff. You can look at the slides. It's just talking about homozygous versus heterozygous, whether you have 2 copies or 1 copy. If you have the most well-studied methylation gene is C677T, and if you have 2 copies, you have roughly about a 50% reduction in speed. And if you have 1 copy, like half of, you know, the country of Italy, you have about a 30% enzyme speed reduction. But your body's resilient. It can make more copies. If something's slow, it can make more copies of it to help make up for that. But certainly having the gene creates risk, okay? Again, this is talking about compound heterozygous, and this is the case where, you know, I'm not even gonna go into it. I think it's too nerdy, and you guys are already, your neurons are already just like firing and they're getting towards the red line. So this is something you can refer to when I give you the slides. Now, I mentioned this earlier, spontaneous abortion is absolutely related to MTHFR because MTHFR problems that are not supported and properly addressed, in pregnancy, the quantity of estrogen could be 30 times higher or more at the day of delivery than it was at the day of conception. So that huge, massive quantity of estrogen created by the placenta to allow pregnancy to progress has to be managed by the woman's body. And if she has MTHFR that isn't supported, her ability to manage that estrogen is severely compromised. The estrogen builds up, the coagulability goes up, and what did we talk about with the placental environment? Unfortunately, those microvasculature placental vessels are going to be the first vessels that can no longer perfuse blood when the coagulability of the mother's body goes up. And so this leads to the whole sequelae of preeclampsia, eclampsia, and unfortunately sometimes pregnancy loss. I had a patient earlier this year who had a daughter at 34, had 10 miscarriages over the ensuing 6 years, and decided she wanted to give it one more try. And going through our program, which I'll tell you a little bit about at the end, we have We have a protocol that we use in our coaching program. We got her gut cleaned up and tested and supported for a few months, and we found out she had 2 copies of MTHFR, some other genetic issues. We aggressively supported her to optimize that pathway. And after 10 miscarriages, I mean, again, I can't imagine like her. I'm just impressed with people's spirit. You know, that's a resilient spirit. She had a healthy baby at 41 at home, perfect pregnancy, perfect baby, perfect. And knowing the MTHFR and how important it is in that progression of pregnancy allowed us to help her on that journey. So we've talked about estrogen being high and causing a stroke. It's kind of related in the same way that having MTHFR increases the risk of stroke, because whether you have too much estrogen or whether you have a poorly supported MTHFR, the net effect will be hypercoagulability, inflamed blood, thick blood, blood likes to clot, you're more susceptible to have a stroke. So there is that dual kind of parallel concept. You could have normal MTHFR genes and have so much high estrogen that it's like you're walking around having 2 copies of MTHFR. You could have normal levels of estrogen that aren't really high, but having 2 copies of MTHFR that aren't supported is also going to be a risk factor. So just to kind of compare those 2 ideas. So in looking at MTHFR, this is methylation 101 in general, okay? The model is simply this. You have a set of genes that are involved in building things. Massively important for human life. Cell division, baby growth, our growth, all that stuff. Super important. Then you have a handful of genes, very important ones, that are involved in getting rid of things. Also, a very important, critical part of how our body works. So looking at it from that perspective, we really have the building and we have the breaking down, okay? I'm not gonna talk about that, sorry. Phase 2 detox pathways. So when you get your Dutch test and you see the breakdown products of the 4-hydroxy, the 16-hydroxy, the 2-hydroxy, you're looking at chemical reactions going through the liver that are related to phase 1, and then those molecules are then phase 2 detoxed and removed. So we have 3 ways that we get rid of phenols. Hormones, estrogen is a phenol. Phenolic compounds are either going to be detoxed with glutathione, or excuse me, with glucose, glucuronic acid, sulfur, or methylation. Glutathione, as important as that is for detox, doesn't really even touch the phenol part of the equation. So you can see that methylation is just, it's one of those 3 critical pathways that helps us get rid of estrogen. Here's another map. This is a really cool, this is a good reference. If you don't have this one at home, I would download it and look at it. It's a good map, but you know, you have the good estrogen here, you have the best estrogen, the 2-methoxy, the really ugly estrogen down here, the 4-hydroxy. But all of this, whether you have the good, the bad, or the ugly, it's removed via methylation, sulfation, and glucuronidation, okay? So really quickly, in the time I have left, I see that I've done my usual thing and I've talked a lot, which I don't have a problem talking, as you can see. I want to just give you a couple other pearls. I'm going to kind of go through the end of this last few minutes together and see if I can answer some questions. So the gallbladder is the most estrogen and methylation sensitive organ in the human body. Estrogen causes gallbladder problems. You can see on this study that PEMT, betaine homocysteine methyltransferase, BHMT, methionine transferase, these genes, the genes that we talk about all the time in methylation, are sitting on the edge of the liver and are involved in making bile, because we have to make choline. Choline production is like 70% of what the methylation cycle supports. We can't make choline because we can't methylate fast enough. We change the recipe of our bile. Estrogen slows the bile down. It makes bile sticky, just like it does the blood. It coagulates it, makes it more clotty. The same thing is happening to the production of bile. Estrogen and their metabolites are involved in the pathogenesis of cholestasis diseases, without question. Without question, the high levels of estrogen that we are exposed to is destroying our gallbladders. And you combine that with our poor diet and bad methylation support, we have an issue. And so estrogen should, or bile should be about the consistency of dish soap. Joy, Dawn, runny dish soap. Okay, you grab the bottle, you lay it on the counter, you pound it with your hand. The dish soap should squirt across the room. That doesn't happen when we have high estrogen levels. We get a syrup, we get a molasses in the gallbladder because of the changes happening in the liver due to high estrogen. This is why like taurine and methylation support like folate, but also SAMe and other cofactors help thin the bile and rescue the phenotype of the person heading into having their gallbladder, quit working and have that surgery. And so that's one pearl. The gallbladder bile is turned to sludge when we have a high amount of estrogen in the human body that isn't being managed. And so over time, you're going to see the female fat, 40, flatulent, floating stools. That's a known phenotype. And at the core of that whole description is a woman who's had too much estrogen in her body and was unable to process it correctly. Okay, we can rescue these phenotypes if we intervene at an early stage. If it's really diseased, there's not a lot that can happen. The last thing I want to share with you with estrogen has to do with our mental headspace. Stress management is something I talk about every day, almost all day long in my practice with athletes, with people who have, blown discs, with people with horrible autoimmune conditions, whatever the patient is dealing with, there's usually a stress component affecting our malady. And stress relates to, how much adrenaline and dopamine do you have in your brain? That's the neurotransmitter side of it. We talk a lot about cortisol, but we have the dopamine and the adrenaline analog. And so the estrogen molecule, ironically, has a profound effect on how we process dopamine and adrenaline in our brain, because it slows down two key genes, as I said a minute ago, that are the removing thing genes. The COMT, the MAO, are supposed to help break down the stress neurotransmitters that we release. If we can't break down stress neurotransmitters, our tolerance for stress is going to go down, our mental bandwidth goes down, and our life begins to change in a negative way. So we see here that MAO and COMT are both inhibited epigenetically by estrogen. We've known this for a long time. This study's from 1995. It's almost 27 years old. Estrogens have an antidepressive effect, which is good if you have depression. But if you have a normal amount of serotonin and dopamine and you increase estrogen really high, you're going to create supranormal levels of dopamine. You're going to really increase the dopamine level in your nervous system, which is actually going to be leading towards anxiety. In other words, the excess of antidepressants is anxiety, right? They're polar opposites. If you take someone who's depressed, you give them a little antidepressant, they go into the Goldilocks, middle of the curve. But if you're already in the middle of the curve and you take a powerful antidepressant in super high doses, you keep pushing to the other side of the curve, and you may deal with symptoms of anxiety. So when you have 2 copies of COMT, as many women do, that also just genetically slows down the clearance of dopamine and adrenaline, leading to higher anxiety. And then we see in the research as well, the higher a woman's level of estrogen, going along the x-axis to the right, the higher the amount of anxiety. So I'm not trying to be sexist, I'm just observing reality, and looking at the studies here in our scientific milieu. Too much estrogen changes your tolerance for stress, and it makes life less positive because your tolerance for stress goes down. And so again, with the COMT issue, we know that you don't even have to be born with 2 copies of COMT, just like with MTHFR and other genes. If you have a lot of estrogen, mycoestrogen, heavy metal estrogen, birth control estrogen, or all 3 in your system, it's going to slow down COMT and lead to a mental change in your landscape, and it has health negative consequences for our patients. And so in our practice, we look at this model of the bell curve of dopamine and adrenaline, and on the left side is low dopamine and on the right side is high. And what we notice in our practice with subjective symptoms, affective symptoms, we see that women who are highly estrogen dominant and some men have a preponderance of these symptoms, especially anxiety, panic attacks, worry, perseveration, their insomnia problems, because they can't detoxify dopamine because estrogen's slowing down their clearance of this important brain chemical. So I've just given you a lot of information, and I appreciate your attention and your time. That's as far as I'm going to go in, giving you all this stuff to digest. I do appreciate your attention. I really appreciate the opportunity that Dutch has offered here. I just want to say the book is good. It's kind of my protocol, my thoughts, and a lot of science, hundreds of references in there on how we work patients through a functional medicine workup. And then based on the success we've had, we have a coaching program. It's a practice management system that we find in functional medicine is missing in the space. So it's a business system of how to implement functional medicine into your business. But more than that, it's a coaching program on how to help you tackle these complicated cases. We give you the protocols. We tell you when to do the Dutch test and help you, interpret it, that kind of thing. And so I'm excited about that. I love helping doctors get great results in their practice like we've been able to achieve in ours as well. So if you're interested in any of the coaching information, please send me an email to the email you see below, and we'll reach out with information. And as was mentioned earlier by Noah, I've worked with Dutch for about 7 years. Nobody knocked on my door and said, hey, these guys are great, go check them out. I just saw their test, I saw their research, and I was like, man, these guys think like I think. I want to use this tool. And so it's helped me in many cases, many difficult cases. I just had a couple Dutch tests go out the door just this morning for a couple dealing with some secondary infertility. And there's just lots of reasons for using this tool. And so if you're on the fence or new to the Dutch family, let them know, reach out. You get some great deals, getting some new tests. And as you can see, they offer a lot of, just a lot of support. They're big on education. That's why we're friends. So that's it. Do I have chat? Any questions? I got a few minutes. Any burning questions out there?
Yeah, we do have a couple questions that we will run by you, and I'll also throw my team a curveball. We'll give away one of your books to the first 5 people that sign up today to become a provider. We will also be giving them one of your books
Awesome.
because I read it and I think it's a great book. So let's share it with our people. So we'll work those details out. But first 5 people to sign up get a free book along with their new provider offer. The first question that we have for you, Dr. Rostenberg, a lot of people were asking the title of the book that you spoke about the terrain theory, specifically that the title of the book. To be more clear, we'll have our team type it in once you say it out loud to us again.
I think that worked out. It's a theory of endobiogeny. It's a mouthful.
The theory of endobiogeny. I'll let you spell that for us at some point.
Yeah, it's a new word for me too, but it's a cool book. It's volume 4 is the one I have. It's kind of like their handbook. So if you're ready to nerd out, that's a good one to go for.
Awesome. Yeah, seems to be a lot of interest. A lot of people excited about that one. Another question, and this probably may be the only question that we get to today. We will try to do our best to answer all of the other questions that we got in the chat directly to you when we can. What do you recommend for a child age of 6, and how aggressive would you go with their detox? The context is that this child has been growing hair under their armpits for the past 1 to 2 years.
So it's an excellent question, and without sounding cavalier, to my knowledge, herbs and phytonutrients and plant-based antioxidants and extracts are extremely safe. Other cultures that have soy, for example, as a staple in their diet, they would never give it to their infants. That's just something that people in the Western world decided would be a good idea, which it isn't. But once they develop into, young children, giving phytoestrogens and things of that nature, they're so weak. I can show you all the research. It's absolute clarity. Phytoestrogens, like you find in the products I use and recommend in my program, are effective at removing xenobiotics and xenoestrogens, but they're not strong enough. The molecule that they remove, for example, might be 1,000 times more powerful at the cell than the molecule we're replacing it with. So you get a net reduction in estrogenic activity and the stimulation of that target tissue. So as far as that goes, it would basically be a pared down protocol that we would give to adults. And as far as dosing goes, you know, I ask adults to swallow all kinds of capsules and stuff, and they complain and he and ha about it all the time. And a 6-year-old, we're gonna have a different protocol. But you take somebody who, you take a dose you would give to a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, someone who's almost full size, and you multiply by the age. So you take the age 6, divide it by, let's say 12, so that's 0.5. So you take the adult dose and divide it, depending on how big the child is, somewhere by times 0.5 or times 0.35. You just reduce the dose down based on body mass, but really the protocol is going to be very similar to a grown-up because, you know, the physiologies are the same, pathways are the same. But that's one of those things. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good coaching moment there. Definitely, you have to step down for body size, but you take your adult protocol, multiply it by 0.5 or 0.35, and then you get whatever that comes out as. That's what you would give the young child. And you probably can't reverse the pubic hair or the hair under the arms, but what you would want to do is delay the onset of the next series of changes. And that would be worth pursuing in my mind, just to, you know, help get them back on a normal curve.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like we finished right on time. If we didn't get to your question today, we apologize about that. If you want to submit that question to marketing@dutchtest.com, we will do our best to try to get that answered for you. So thank you all again for joining us today. Check your inboxes tomorrow for the link to the recording and to download the slides that were presented. If you have any additional questions about the contact or in general about the Dutch test, you can either email our marketing@dutchtest.com or info@dutchtest.com. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.